I would request the people who are standing if we can sit down. We'll start. People outside, please bring your tea inside. Maheshwari, 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 if you can just tell people to come inside. Thank you.
After that. That's the only reason. And if they don't get the time, I know so much to talk. And a lot of them are island, so they would have met in a batch. You met somebody in Roshni? No. I know why. Okay, quite. So the talker.
People at the back, if we can settle down, we will start. Thank you, Swati.
Thank you. If you could get back into your table. Yes, we are starting. The doors are going to close now.
Singing bowl is needed.
That's right. Okay, I will introduce.
Okay, so the next speaker is here, Indranil Chakraborty. Let me give you a brief introduction about him for people who do not know. He has been helping organizations and leaders harness the power of stories in business. Just to give a background, 25 years ago, he started his career with Hindustan Unilever, worked with them for 14 years. Then he was the global brand director, and he started selling teddy bears because he found that more interesting. And he set up and started running a franchisee operation for Build a Beer Workshop. And his last work was with Tata Teleservices. Then he went to become the CMO of Mahindra Holidays. And then he founded STORYWORKS. And over these years, he has helped organizations use stories to get their key messages like vision, mission, strategy, and transformation to be easily understood and remembered by employees. So I think that fits in beautifully from the last session when we talked about narratives. And right now we will hear how that can be used to translate to all the employees down the line. Interestingly, he's also an alumni of the Peter Redding School of Coaching, and he graduated 4 years back. He has also got his SEC certification now, so he's also a very experienced coach with us. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Avik. Thank you. And really, it's great that these two gentlemen did a great job on purpose. It will help me link all that up. So the year was 2011. I was, as he said, the Chief Marketing Officer at Mahindra Holidays, and we decided to come up with a mission. We called it the Credo. And our Credo was making every moment magical. Yeah? We thought it inspired, it gave purpose, it worked for the CEO, and it worked for the janitor. Yeah? And then we said, how do you make sure that everyone in the organization delivers to that purpose? And so we said we need some guidelines of behavior, but that's what values are supposed to be. So we said, let's rewrite our values and get in behaviors that will get us to making every moment magical. So we came up with behaviors or guidelines to behavior like no room for ordinary. Why? Because ordinary can't be magical. Experience is everything. Why? Because half the organization, which is sales, were tapping people like you and me on the shoulder in malls and petrol pumps and saying 5-star holiday, 5-star holiday. Yeah, I'm sure you've met those guys. But what does that mean in terms of experience? And the other half of the organization, which is the heads of resorts, when I went to them and said, let's get a better experience, a different experience for our members, they said, sure, give us more inches. Inches of TV, inches of mattress. And I was thinking, that's not experience. A hard bed in a tree house might actually be the most memorable experience. So experience is everything. And so on and so forth. And everyone seemed to be so very happy. Wow, what a purpose, guidelines for behavior. My boss was getting awards from Anand Mahindra. But I got into a funny funk. I said, how do you make sure that now that we've got these things that everyone is aligned and delivers? How do we even make sure that they understand? Because in many organizations that I had worked before, either I was part of rolling out or making, purpose or values or these words were nothing but posters on the wall. And we had done that. We had done an annual conference where we launched the mission or the credo and those new values. We had made screensavers, danglers, posters, mouse pads. But 6 months later, as I went through the organization, no one seems to really know what that meant. And I did stupid things. Like anytime I saw a leader in the press or TV talking about we believe in values, I wrote to the company, usually in the contact us page, saying here's a message for your CEO. How do you embed values? Yeah. And I usually got no answer. From one company, I got a brochure. Yeah. And then in that journey of trying to figure out how do you embed values, I met these two gentlemen from Australia. They said they knew how to embed values with stories, and they were doing something called business storytelling, two words that I had never heard together before. And so in my interactions with them, I got to know that that's not the way to sort of embed values is not by writing about them or explaining them, because after all, you'll explain them in the same English that is impossible to understand, like no room for ordinary. And so he said, go and collect stories from across the organization about what people think is that value being lived by seniors, juniors, peers. When you come back, you'll realize that more than 50-60% of the stories are junk. That's not what you really meant. But there will be 20-30% of stories were exactly what you meant. For example, when I went around looking for stories on no room for ordinary, I met this guy. He's a houseboy from the Shimla resort, and he's saying, sir, one day an extra large family came to the resort. I said, what is an extra large family? 4 children, 2 parents. I said, okay. Then they were staying in one room, and everyone wanted 2 extra towels. I provided 18 towels in one room. No room for ordinary. Now, he was not joking. That's what he really believed. But was that the reason why we had come up with that value? No. And then you get these stories, like the one that is seared in my head, which is from the receptionist at the Coorg resort in Karnataka. And the receptionist says that, my colleague got a call once from a member. He took the message, and then he called the lunchroom. When he called the lunchroom, I overheard. He's telling the lunchroom, member is coming with his wife and 2 children. They are stuck in traffic. They won't be able to make it for the lunch service. Can we pack some lunch boxes? So this guy said, hey, did you ask them which route they're coming from? He said, yeah, that route. Hey, call the lunchroom again, no? So why? Arey, just call them and tell them to pack some tea and cakes also. He said, but why? He said, don't you know there's a flower show there and there's a politician coming for inauguration? They blocked the road. No way they're going to come before 6 o'clock. So the other guy said, oh my God, there are children in the car. Half an hour later, the shift gets over. This guy goes to the lunchroom, picks up the lunch boxes, takes it on his bike, travels for some 8 to 10 kilometers through interior roads, keeps calling the member's mobile, locates the car and says, your children must be hungry. And that is living the value, no room for ordinary. And suddenly people get it. And that's really how, someone asks, how do you embed purpose? How do you make sure the purpose gets aligned? And then you teach the senior leaders or anyone who will ever talk about values or mission or vision, whatever that you're trying to drive, that they shouldn't just go and say, we believe in no room for ordinary. You say that, and then you say, for example, Ravi from Coorg, and you tell Ravi's story. And through the multiple stories that you tell, people get to understand what that behavior is supposed to mean. Yeah? And when I saw that power, because the next 2-3 months after we started sharing such stories, I would not say hundreds, but I got 7, 8, 10 stories from across the country where I could see that they have got it. Yeah? And that's really what got me into starting out STORYWORKS. And as I got into it, I realized that we all like stories, but as soon as we wear the business suit and walk in through the business door, we then have a new definition for stories. Yeah? And what is the definition? I have, in the last 4 years, trained about 600 odd very senior leaders on the science of storytelling. And one of the first questions I ask in the workshop is, imagine this is an important meeting. Maybe the CEO is here. It's just about to start, and someone says, let me tell you a story. What is the first thought in your head? And 90% of the people, actually 95% of the people tell me, what an idiot. Why is he doing this? Is he not prepared? How long is it going to take? Why should we be listening to this? And about 5% say, maybe there's something in it. And any of you who's ever had a deliverable, sales of course, and any other, and you haven't been able to quite deliver, and your boss had come and said, why didn't this happen? And you started, this happened and then that happened. And were you ever stopped by a boss who said, kahani mat batao? Yeah, don't tell me a story, come to the facts. So that is the challenge that we start with, which is that stories are unreal. Yeah, stories are made up, stories are excuses, stories are for entertainment, stories are for children. What I hope to do in the next 45 odd minutes is to first break that myth for you. Yeah? And then touch upon just 2 of the 7, 8 areas that you can immediately put stories to work in the day-to-day work that you do. And one of the reasons why this session is not called storytelling for coaching is from the Peter Redding School. I've learned that when you're coaching, you're not telling. Yeah? So this is storytelling for coaches. Yeah? How do you go and connect with people? How do you go and explain what is happening? How do you go and tell them how things will change if you start coaching? And so that's what this is about. How do you get the power of stories into business? To start with, I'm going to park a definition for stories that I use for all my consulting work and all the discussions we'll have here today. And that is that stories are a fact. What we are going to do or learn to do is to wrap it in context and deliver it with emotion. Can stories be made up? Of course they can, but not in the work I do. Can stories be mythology? I believe you do a lot of that. Devdutt does a fantastic job of that, but not in the work I do. In the work I do, I start with stories as a fact because I'm going to start trying to break that myth that stories are excuses. They are made up. So that's the working definition. Now, before I go on further, I want you to react by raising your hands to this question. How many of you in the room would raise your hands to the question, I am a natural storyteller? Yeah? Oh, that's fantastic. But for those who didn't raise your hands, how many of you went on a holiday in the last 1 year? Those who didn't raise your hands? Almost everyone who didn't raise their hand now has raised their hands that we have gone on a holiday in the last 1 year. So tell me, when you came back from your holiday, did you zip your lips and just go back to work? No? Then what did you do? You shared. But you're not a storyteller, so you must have made a PowerPoint presentation. 3 things I learned in my holiday, 30 things I didn't. No? What about the last time you guys went to a bar and with your colleagues? I'm sure you discussed a certain gentleman called the boss, right? But if you're not storytellers, then did you make PowerPoint presentations in the bar as well? 2 things I like about my boss, 200 things I don't. No, we are all storytellers. Yeah? We are all without fail storytellers, and we have been from even before language was born. Yeah? And we did cave paintings to tell stories, but we were all storytellers. We are also great story listeners. We are all wired for stories. Have you ever been in a meeting room where something is going on, some meeting or presentation, and there are a lot of people down on their mobile phones? Yes? Yeah? Hey, listen, if I can't talk to an audience which I can't hear. So yes or no, have you? Yes, thank you. Next time you see that situation, try this. Just say, 6 years ago, and stop. Every head is going to go up. Why? Because we are all wired for stories. That's what we are. The question is, why should that matter in business? I'm going to try and share some of the reasons why. I mean, I can actually have a 2-hour sessions on why. And 1 or 2, I want to sort of question the myth that you have. And if that is my objective, then this is a pretty stupid slide, right? This you knew, right? Yes or no? Yeah, but I think we are on 2 different pages. Correct me if I'm wrong. When you see this sentence, you're thinking of Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, or that enigmatic CEO in your office. Yes? No, I'm thinking of something else. And in order to understand what I'm thinking, I want you to go with me on an imaginary journey. And the journey is that you are the managing committee of a giant manufacturing organization. Let's say cement manufacturing organization. And I'm the safety officer. And it's time for my annual review, and I've walked in, managing committee. And I walk in and say, gentlemen, we've had a bad year. We lost 8 people. And that's 33% more than the people we lost the previous year. And while the non-fatalities major, this is like limb losses, people that have lost their arms or legs, has gone down by 14%, that's 12. And even the non-fatalities minor and near misses are shooting through the sky. And I have presented to you guys every quarter, what am I going to do? But nothing seems to have worked. And we just can't let this go on. We are not only the worst among cement industries, we are worst among industries. So, I looked across the world and I found these two gentlemen in Paris, a boutique agency that has worked with some of the most complex industries in the world, who are confident that if they work with us for a year, they can not only bring us to Indian standards, they can get our safety to world standards. And my request to you in the managing committee is to sign off on a project that will last a year and cost $500,000. Now, I want you to think in your own head, as a managing committee member, what will your response be? Yeah. It could probably be one of three. Sack the guy. After all, that's his job. He's a safety officer. 2, here's the check. Or 3, we can't take decision with that data. We need more data. Yeah, does it happen in the north factories? Does it happen in the morning shift? Does it happen in the front of the factory? Etc., etc. You'd be probably in one of those 3 buckets. Now, if you can, again, erase what I just said, if possible. Just erase, rewind, erase. And imagine I walked in again. And I walked in and said, 6 months ago, I met Ramesh Menon's family. As you guys know, we lost Ramesh in that boiler accident in Jabalpur. And while we have given Ramesh's family a 5 lakh rupees ex gratia payment, his wife's been telling me that she's so worried as to however she's going to get those 2 daughters educated and married. And just last week, I met Vivek. Vivek lost his right arm in the Mumbai accident. And yes, we've promised Vivek employment for life. But Vivek's been telling me there is no hope in hell he can get the kind of jobs he could have got if he had his right arm. And these guys are not alone. Yeah? We've had 8 of them once. We've had 12 Viveks. And while that's 14, that's still 12 Viveks. And all those 43 and 170 are people like Vivek waiting to happen. And we can't let this go on. I've come quarter after quarter, presented to you, nothing has worked. And I've looked across the world, found these 2 people in Paris, the best in the industry. They've worked with complex industries like ours. And they are confident that if they work with us, they can bring us to world standards. My request to you in the managing committee is to sign off a project that will take a year and cost $500,000. Now, my question to you in the managing committee is, anyone in the room who has not changed their mind at all from where they were earlier and where they are now? Can't be. There'll be some people who haven't changed their minds. Half a hand there. Would I be right if I said you are in the data bucket in the first one? Absolutely. Okay, then my question to those, because the only people who have ever disagreed with this is the people in the data bucket. I need more data. Would I be right in saying in the first version, you would say by the next review, I want far more data, ye chahiye, wo chahiye. In this version, you'll say, I need the data by this evening. Yes or no? And so that's what I mean by saying stories inspire action. Now, I have taken a stretched example because of a workshop or whatever, talk situation. But you think of the time that you have put on a table on a graph, which I'm sure you've done if you're in a corporate setting last week, and you'll do it next week. The fact is, the people who are listening to you don't have the context to the data that you do. So whether it is an employee engagement survey or a market research, if you've gone and said that 80% of employees believe, yeah, there are that many anecdotes. Can you share 1 or 2 anecdotes and set context? So if you go back to my opening sort of definition of stories, that stories are a fact. All I have done is wrapped it in context and delivered with emotion. So that's why I believe stories can inspire. And stories are memorable. I'm sure if I asked you tomorrow, do you remember the Kurg receptionist story? What are you likely to say? Yes or no? Yes, because stories are memorable. And there are many reasons. We can go into the kind of brain research that is taking place, which just tells you why stories are so memorable. Stories spread. A well-crafted, well-narrated story is not going to stay with you. Imagine if you guys were from Mahindra Holidays and you heard the story about Kurg. Will you keep it to yourself? No, you will share it with other people. You share it with the friends and family that I work in. I'm so proud that I work in a company like that. So stories spread. Stories also have impact. Yeah. I've done this session in the afternoon as well. I haven't got too many people in that shape. So stories have a lot of impact. But there is also another thing why stories are so important in business. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to take you through about 8-10 photographs very quickly of people in tables like yours telling people stories during my workshops. I want you to just look at whether anything is common between those pictures. Yeah, anything common between these pictures. Anything common? One person is talking, the others are. How do you know they're attentively listening? Absolutely. Look at their body language. They're all leaning in. How often have you been in a presentation where everyone in the room was leaning in? Yeah? Most people would do this because that's a body language of saying, I'm not yet in. Yeah? So my question to you is, how powerful do you think it would be if every time you spoke, people leaned in? If every time you spoke, people understood everything that you said? Yeah? We talked about that, how do you embed values, remember? Yeah? Through the stories of how do you understand no room for ordinary? So people understood everything you said. If people remembered your message, yeah, and people went and were inspired to act on it, and finally they went and spread it, how powerful would that be? Very powerful. So that's what stories can do in business. And that's what each one of you, every one of you can do. The problem is that not everything labeled a story is a story. In most of the companies that I've gone and spoken, I've gone before the speech and looked at their website and looked for the word story. I found hundreds of them. Not one, except maybe one, in the 54 odd companies, there was really a story. Nowadays, a nice thing is the About Us page goes to our story. What is our story? We were founded in 1978 by so-and-so, and then he did this, and then he did that. Then his sons went to Harvard and Stanford, and then did this, then they were following this. We are number 1 in this, number 2 in this, and we've just launched the digital version, and we are number 3. That's our story. Why is that a story? Because if stories are easy to spread, easy to remember, easy to understand, does that qualify? No, it doesn't. Not everything labeled. So because definitely sequential narration of fact is not a story, which I just did, but which is what most websites talk about. So then what is a story? And for me, these are the fundamental building blocks without which you cannot have a story. The first is every story needs to have a time marker and a location marker, and sometimes a character marker. What is the most quintessential time marker when it comes to stories? Once upon a time does not work in business, but it is. But you cannot have a story without time or a location. The second is it has to have a sequential causal sort of step. So 2 happened because 1 happened, 3 happened because 2 happened. You then need characters. Yeah? And it'll be great if characters had names. Why do you need names? Because that's how you build empathy. Just think of your favorite novel, and imagine I took it back, and I changed the name of the hero to he, and everything as he, his, him, and gave it back to you. Would it be the same novel? Why not? It's the same plot, it's the same, but it won't, because you can't empathize, which is why most writers, even in magazines or newspapers, if they can't reveal, what do they say? Let's call her Lata. You forget that after the second paragraph that she is not really Lata, because that's how you, so character, and whenever people tell stories, you don't talk in third person, you have dialogues. Yeah? But would that make up a story? No, it wouldn't. Why? Because it's like yesterday I took, evening I took off from Bombay and I landed in Delhi and I checked into the hotel. Everything was done by ODA, so it was very smooth. And then I went to sleep. In the morning I got up and asked the guy, his name was Hari, can you give me breakfast? And he got me a great breakfast. Is that a story? No, it's not. Yeah? What makes it a story is if at the end there is a little bit of an aha. You don't have to fall off the chair. Oh, yeah? And if that story went into saying that, I don't know, I was a vegetarian and he gave me sausages, or the fact that I kept having the breakfast and then suddenly realized my session timing was already there. There is an aha. Now, while that is a story, that's still not a business story. Why? Because in business, you need to make a point. Otherwise, why are you telling the story? Yeah? So, I really think that little things make a big difference. In 2007, during the Iraq war, there was this American general who was placed in a little town called Tirkit, where he had lots of riots. And one day, from his window in the plaza, he noticed that every time there's a riot, there's a buildup of people right from the morning till the evening when the final big crowd creates the riot. So he got an idea and called up the mayor of the town and said, Mayor, the next time I call you, can you remove the food carts from the plaza? The mayor said, food carts? Why? He said, just go with me. Next time he saw the crowd build up in the morning, he called the mayor and said, Mayor, food carts. Mayor removed the food carts, and sure enough, the build-up never took place. Because the morning crowd, after some time, at some point, were hungry. With just that one thing, moving food carts out of the plaza, he brought down the riots in the town by 60%, which is why I believe that little things make a big difference. What I have just done is demonstrated to you what a business story would sound like. Yeah? I started with a relevant statement. I asked your permission tacitly to tell a story by saying, you know, little things make a big difference, and some of you nodded. And then I went on with all that, and I brought it back saying, why? Because, you know, the reason I shared that story is because little things can make a big difference. Chances are you've heard it before, but now that you've heard it through the story, the chances are it's going to get embedded even further. And that's why stories can, you know, when you use it in this structure, can always work. And one of the thumb rules I have is that for all kinds of stories that you say in business, except one kind that I will talk about today as well, if your story is more than 90 to 120 seconds long, ask yourself, why the hell is it so long? Because we all fall in love with some parts of our story which is not relevant. In a bar, okay. Yeah? I could tell this Iraq war story by saying, you know, in the second Iraq war, the one that the junior Bush did it. But his father also was a dumb guy, you know. Then anyway, they put these bloody guys into the, you know, foot soldiers there. They had American generals everywhere. There's a guy in Turkey, lots of riots, but a good guy, twice decorated. In fact, his father fought in the Vietnam War. That's okay in a bar. Is any of that important, who Bush was, or fact that he was decorated for the point I'm making? No. So you've got to learn to do what writers in any novel workshop will tell you, is to learn to kill your darlings. Yeah. So go through your story and see what can you drop off without losing the essence. Because, you know, who said that? Leonardo da Vinci. Simplicity is the best form of sophistication. And great designers don't stop when they can't put anything in. The great designers stop when they can't take anything out. Think of the first iPhone. Now, the work around stories that I do is not just storytelling, although today will be more about storytelling, but there is at least three huge parts. One is storytelling, one is story listening, story triggering. I'll not get into too much listening except for the example I gave you in the beginning. How do you embed purpose? How do you embed values? Through listening and collecting stories and then telling the ones that are relevant to that value or purpose that you have been driving. Yeah? So in storytelling, what we have done is to start people off, we have identified these 4 areas in business that stories can be very powerful. Will you only use stories in the long run in 4 areas? No, you won't. But you know, when you start learning driving, you know which gear you're on. Yeah, your muscle starts building. That's what we are trying to do. And what are the 4 areas? First is when you're building rapport. Would you agree with me if I said people buy you first before they buy your idea, product, or service? Yes or no? Yeah. The question is, how do you sell yourself in the first meeting? Most people I know introduce themselves like a mini resume. Yeah. I did this, then I did that, and you know, I studied this, and I did this. Now, that's credentials. It can get you through the door, but does not build connection. And so and for each of these 4 areas, we've developed what we call story patterns. Yeah, as the science. What is science? If you repeat experiment, you should get the same result. So we've developed these patterns which says, if you do it this way every time, you will get a great result. And the first kind of story that I will share with you how to do is for building rapport. It's called connection story. The second is about sharing any important message. I've called it strategic clarity. It could be anything from your purpose to your vision to your mission to your transformation to strategy to any change. We are changing the way we are going to be requisitioning cars in the company. Any change, how do you explain that change? We'll talk about that. There are 2 more we have. One is called influence story, which is how do you change people's mind. I grew up in companies where the answer was data and analysis, and if I came and you didn't agree, I went and got more data and more analysis and you still didn't agree. Now I have a belief that it's not just about data. It is about data to start with, but it is about the story in your head that you have about the data. And data cannot replace story. So influence story structure tells you how you can marry story and data to, instead of pushing people to change their mind, painting that alternate universe and pulling it in. And finally, how do you share knowledge, wisdom, and success? Most people use case studies. I'm yet to meet a human being who loves reading them. Yeah. So we work with B2B companies on this a lot because they'll survive on case studies. They don't have an ad to sell their product. And how do you take your case studies into oral stories which are interesting, memorable, and retellable? And that's what we call models of success. We won't have time for those two today, but I'll definitely look at the first two. And the words that I'll keep using are clarity story structure, which is to explain change, connection story structure to build connection. We're not going to talk about influence and success. Now, to look at building connection. Most of you did not know me till I walked on the stage, and there was a bit of an introduction. And suppose we were to stop the conference now, and you went out, and a colleague of yours asked, "What's this guy I see like?" Yeah. How would you describe me based on a story? Did I come and say my name is and where I was born and what I do now and some of the stuff that speakers might be saying? I didn't. I told you a story about how we build values, etc. Yeah? Just based on what you've heard about, what are the words about my character that you would use to describe me? Anything. Can't be nothing. Passionate, articulate, what else? Interesting. That's very insightful. Let's stop there. I could get a few more. Yeah. Courageous. Let's stop there. Now suppose I didn't do what I did. I walked in on stage and said, "My name is Indranil, I was born in Shillong, and and I am courageous, insightful, and whatever." Yeah, what would you have thought about me? Many words that you won't want to repeat in public. But that's the power of using a connection story. Yeah? I used a story about what happened, and just through that, you inferred so much about me. But if I started and made those assertions, you would never. And why is it so important? Because as I said, character will always trump credentials, always. Yeah? And the only way you will get to connect with people is by who you are. And you can do that in your first meeting itself. Let me give you another example. Imagine that you guys were bankers. Yeah? And I have STORYWORKS. Yeah? And I'm coming to seek money, right? For my business, I want to expand. Here are two ways I can do it, right? The first way is, "Hi, my name is Indranil, and I was born in Shillong, and I studied computer science, and then I went to an IIM, and then I joined Levers, and then I did this, and I started STORYWORKS. I'm very passionate about stories. I have an entrepreneurial bent of mind, etc., etc. Can you please give me some money?" Now, the problem with assertion is every time we are asserted to, red flags go up. As soon as I say, "I'm very passionate," they say, "Oh, yeah." "I'm entrepreneurial," "Oh, yeah." Yeah. Now, I could step back, and before I go into the meeting, think, what might this guy need to know before he gives me the money? Probably he would have seen my LinkedIn profile and said, cushy job for 21 years. Got a salary at the end of the month. First 14 years in a company that is known to produce CEOs but not known to produce entrepreneurs. The most risk-averse company in the world. I don't know whether he'll be able to really start up on his own. And so I could do a different thing. So I could come in and say, "Hi, my name is Indranil, and I was born in Shillong to a middle-class family. But somehow my parents managed to put me into a premier education institute where all my classmates were from more affluent families than I was. Tea garden kids and the works. And they all had more money to spend in the tuck shop, the canteen, always. So I remember in class 3, I came up with this idea of running a comic circulating library, that too with borrowed comics. And I made a bit of money. Not as much as they had, but a little more that I could spend in the canteen. And such things like that have always energized me. I finished my education in Shillong and went to engineering, blah, blah, blah. Would you agree that that 17-second diversion, yes, I've timed it before, would make you as a banker at least start believing that I might have that thing? And that's what a connection story is. And you need multiple connection stories. Why? Because in one meeting, I might need to be known as creative, innovative. Another meeting that I'm diligent, I deliver on time. And so I will have to go and find, and it's very easy. In the 600 people that I've trained, only one person once I couldn't manage to get his connection story on a particular value or character trait that he was. Usually people get it on their own in about 20, 25 seconds. But this guy, I brought him on the center and kept asking questions. And then I said, "Are you really that?" And he said, "No, I want to be that." That's the problem, because if you want to be that, you won't find a story in your life that is there. But everything else that you believe you are, there will be a story, and it doesn't have to be from a corporate setting. As you saw, I used something when I was in class 3. And so a connection story is a story about you that tells you what makes you tick, relevant to that communication, right? In a banker and entrepreneurial street. And so that is what a connection story is. The second is you show them that you're like them. Why? Because we like to work with people like us. Yeah. So that's and connection stories can be used in many forums to connect. Even let's say when you joined your first job, who was the CEO to you? Was it like you or was it like God? Like someone else, someone there. Yeah, so I don't have time for this today, but I would ask you to go into YouTube and look for the Indra Nui milk story. Yeah, and if you can't find it, just drop me a line and I'll share my email and I'll send the link to you. Through that story, just see what Indra Nui manages to do. Suddenly, for even the lowest guy in Pepsi, you'll see through that video how using a story about her life suddenly makes her so real, so like me. Yeah? And so that's what a connection story is about. Now moving to clarity stories. How do you build clarity? Any of you in this room has this problem? No? Should I skip this session? Any of you have this problem, then I will. For the rest of you, this can be a 10, 11-minute further coffee break. For those of you who have this problem, and the funny thing is, most CEOs and heads of businesses, once they get comfortable with me and I have signed the NDA, tell me this is their only problem. They've got smart people, they have the strategy, they have everything. They've got everything articulated, but bolte thak chuka, no one remembers. Yeah? So the question is, why do they not? And I'll just touch upon 3 of the things that I think drive that why do they not. And to demonstrate the first one, I'm going to put a video on screen. The video has no audio. At the end of the video, I'm going to ask you, what do you think was happening there? What the hell was happening there? What did you see?
I saw, a big guy in a room looking at 2 different, presumably a male and a woman, coming in, and he was trying to get the attention of the woman or keep the woman in that house. And couldn't.
Ek Phool Do Mali. Did everyone see Ek Phool Do Mali? Huh? Anyone saw something else? What did you see?
I saw domestic violence.
You saw domestic violence. Did everyone see either Do Fool or domestic violence? Anyone had a third version? Rest of you all saw domestic violence? No? So insurance guy selling something. Avik, what did you see?
A big guy bullying 2 small guys.
A big guy bullying 2 small guys. I can assure you that if I sat and asked the 120 or 110 of you, I would get 110 stories. Even if there was 2 domestic violence stories, there would be 2 slightly different domestic violence stories. You agree? Yes. Then, did you see 120 videos? Then why do I have 120 stories? Why did you have to bring your interpretation into the story? I agree it's a different interpretation. Why did you have to imagine? Because the information was missing, because that video was abstract. Yeah? What is abstract? It was not associated with any specific instance. And we humans are funny. We cannot live with abstraction. We have to put meaning. and then we can go back to work. But we have to put meaning. So imagine that you work on a floor where the CEO never comes. The PR person is in the same floor. One day the CEO walks in and goes into the PR person's room. Can you just quietly continue working? No. You're going to find, I saw that bad report about us. She's going to get fired today. Or I think there's an AGM coming up. They must be working on that speech. And then you can go back to work. You can't live with abstraction. And then she comes out of the room after the CEO goes, hey guys, party tonight, I've been promoted. New story replaces old story, but you needed a story. Now why am I saying all this? Why am I talking about abstraction? I'm going to put 4 sentences on the screen, which are from real strategy documents of clients that I've worked with in the last 4 years. And you need to tell me whether you've heard anything like this before, or in your company you don't speak like this. Deep collaboration and connection. Optimizing our operating practices. No, you haven't heard all this. What about enhancing productive integration? And my favorite, building an enhanced culture of innovation. Any of you heard things like this before? Yeah, all of you? Why isn't this circles and triangles for me, the employee? Why? This is circles and triangles. No, what does enhanced culture of innovation mean? What am I supposed to do tomorrow morning? What does culture mean in the first place? What is innovation? I love the new word that everyone was saying, agility. What is agility? I asked one company employee, they have just launched new values, and they said, we don't need you for all this. We embedded everything. I said, okay, can I talk to anyone? He said, yeah. One junior guy came and said, what is agility? It's about coming to office on time. I said, okay. No, he had to put a meaning to that abstraction. Yeah? So that's the first issue. The second, this is when I started about 3.5, 4 years ago, this is where I used to struggle with very senior people. They would have nodded, but they're thinking, come on, people get it. Then I read this paper out of Stanford called The Curse of Knowledge, written by a graduating student called Elizabeth Newton, who went on to become a professor at Harvard. She did an experiment where she took 2 sets of students, divided into 2 parts, and told them, listen, I'm going to give a list of very popular English songs to this set. Yeah? And their job is to tap on a table. Yeah? And you guys are decoders, and you need to decode what the song is. Made them into pairs. They went out. When they came back, she asked the tappers, qualitatively one by one, what do you think happened? Oh, I'm sure my partner got it. Why are you so sure? It was a bloody easy song. Yeah, everyone knows that song. And I think I was a decent tapper. So, okay, how many of you are willing to doubles or quits the money for this experiment and take a claim that yes or no, 100%? 60 to 70% of people in all her experiments were willing to stake their money saying, my partner definitely got it. Then she went to the partners, took the pieces of paper, tabulated. Do you guys want to take a guess what percentage used to get it? 10, 20, 5? Less than 2.5%. And that's what Elizabeth Newton called the curse of knowledge. What she's basically saying is that when the tune is running in my head, then something like jingle bell sounds perfect. But if the tune is not running in your head, then sounds like noise. And for me, when I read that paper, I had an epiphany. This was my eureka moment. I said, my God, this is what I have been doing at least for the last 10, 12 years of my corporate life. When I was senior enough to write strategy and transformation, all those big things, because I didn't come up with it on the day of the annual conference. I worked with my team for months, sometime a McKinsey and a Bain. By the time I walked up on stage, that tune was running in my head. And then I walked up on stage and did the corporate version of tapping, which is called bullet points on a PowerPoint. And then I walked off stage saying, I'm sure they got it. Easy song. I'm a decent tapper. And then 7 days later, you go and say, what was the message about? Do you guys want to take a guess of what the average retention of after an annual strategy conference across 407 of the top 500 Fortune companies, what percentage of people remembered 7 days later what that big boss had said in the annual conference? Less than 5%. And who did this measure? The guy who inflicted balanced scorecard on us? Robert Kaplan. Yeah, you can read it up. Yeah. So Robert Kaplan comes and says this, and that's the problem, right? It just doesn't connect. And then, of course, we add to it by writing, enhanced culture of innovation. And it's not that every company, if you go through their annual presentations to stockholders, you'll find this. And for that, we use a very, very simple tool, which is something we call the clarity story pattern. So what I work with leaders and organizations is to convert their mission, vision, strategy, transformation, change into a story structure. So we are not writing a story about your strategy, we are writing a strategy like a story. And what happens when you write it like a story? You can't write stories without context. So what is the clarity story pattern? Very simply, this is usually the column that we are all good at, the whole annual conference. What are we going to do? We are going to do A, we're going to do B, we're going to do C. Okay? So I go back. Yeah? We say, in the past, what we were doing this, and these were the things that worked for us. This might not, but we are doing pretty well. But then something happened. There were some turning points. Because if nothing happened, you could continue to do what you're doing in the past. And that something happened could be internal, could be ambition, could be whatever. It could be external, competition, environment, economy. Something changed. And also, there are enablers that have happened. And because of that, this is what we are going to do so that these good things can happen. What good things? Not just the mitigation of what happened, but what else are going to happen? What are the positive side effects of doing this? Yeah? Having crafted this, then we train people to say it orally. Now, when you do that, you're tapping into the three big powers of story. One, stories are easy to understand. Yeah? Even when I've used stories created for a media company with a power plant and said, did you understand their strategy? They said, yeah. Because they didn't hear a PowerPoint, a media company's PowerPoint. They heard a story. We all understand stories, no matter what our background is, what our experience is, what our seniority in the company is. Second, stories are easy to remember. We talked about that. And that really leads to the most powerful third, which is stories are easy to retell. Because as leaders, how many times can you go and talk about your company strategy? You can't even do it in every town hall, but people will forget. And we talked about that even after 7 days, the retention is less than 5%. But when people can tell your strategy, like an oral story, without the crutch of a PowerPoint, is when your message lives on. And the beauty of story, you can tell the long version, you can tell the short version, but you can tell it. And in most of the work we do, when we go and do something we call the impact measure, which is 6 months later, people who are first told how many of them remember, we get about 55, 60%. Is it 100? No, but is it way more than 5? Yes, it is. When we sometimes take this to an external thing, we interestingly add another column and it says our purpose. We were created because. And because we were created for that in the past, this is what we did, and these are the good things that happened. But then something happened. And because of that, we are going to do these things. And so that this, after we have created the narrative structure, we go and look for something we call anti-stories. What is an anti-story? An anti-story is a story your listener will have in their heads as to why what you're proposing will not work. And it's not because they're cynical. They've had an experience of someone like you coming and talking about something like, and so you're doing a merger. They've seen a merger before and say, they're talking merger. It's actually going to be a divorce. They will all have, and the most powerful derailer of any transformation exercise is anti-stories. Yeah? And there's a process in which you find those anti-stories, but the fact is you need to address those anti-stories. Because if you don't address them, it doesn't go away. Yeah? And where do you address them? If you go back here, when you're talking about that particular change, you go and address that anti-story. Now, I'm going to use a video of someone who tends to keep appearing in every kind of program I do, whether it's the journey to TED Talks or public speaking. He didn't learn this from us, but he seems to know exactly how to tell a clarity story. He's dead now, and his name was Steve Jobs. And he is speaking for his last WWDC. What does it stand for? Worldwide Developers Conference, right? And he's going to launch iCloud. I want you to listen to this with two filters. One is to look for the structure. That won't be difficult because I've annotated the video. The second is to look at the complexity of his language. Yeah? Just a minute.
So I get to talk about iCloud. We've been working on this for some time now, and we're really excited about it. About 10 years ago, we had one of our most important insights, and that was that the PC was going to become the digital hub for your digital life. What did that mean? Well, it meant that that's where you were going to put your digital photos. Where else were you going to put them? your digital video off your digital camcorder, and of course, your music, right? You were going to acquire it in the device or potentially on your Mac, and you were going to basically sync it to the Mac, and everything was going to work fine. And it did for the better part of 10 years. But it's broken down in the last few years. Why? Well, because the devices have changed. They now all have music. They now all have photos. They now all have video. And so if I acquire a song, I buy it right on my iPhone, I want to get that to my other devices. Right? I pick up my iPad and it doesn't have that song on it. So I have to sync my iPhone to my Mac. Then I have to sync my other devices to the Mac to get that song. But then they've deposited some photos on the Mac, so I have to sync the iPhone again with the Mac to get those photos. And keeping these devices in sync is driving us crazy. So, we got a great solution for this problem. And we think this solution is our next big insight, which is we're going to demote the PC and the Mac to just be a device, just like an iPhone, an iPad, or an iPod Touch. And we're going to move the digital hub, the center of your digital life, into the cloud. Because all these new devices have communications built into them. They can all talk to the cloud whenever they want. And so now, if I get something on my iPhone, it's sent up to the cloud immediately. Let's say I take some pictures with it. Those pictures are in the cloud, and they are now pushed down to my devices completely automatically. And now everything's in sync with me not even having to think about it. I don't even have to take the devices out of my pocket. I don't have to be near my Mac or PC. Now, some people think the cloud is just a hard disk in the sky, right? And you take a bunch of stuff and you put it in your Dropbox or your iDisk or whatever, and it transfers it up to the cloud and stores it, and then you drag whatever you want back out on your other devices. We think it's way more than that, and we call it iCloud. Now, iCloud stores your content in the cloud and wirelessly pushes it to all your devices. So it automatically uploads it, stores it, and automatically pushes it to all your other devices. But also, it's completely integrated with your apps. And so everything happens automatically, and there's nothing new to learn. It just all works. It just works. Now, you might ask, why should I believe them? They're the ones that brought me Mobile Me. It wasn't our finest hour. Let me just say that. But we learned a lot. Now, the three core apps in Mobile Me were Contacts, Calendar, and Mail. Three things we'd obviously like kept up to date. We've thrown them away. We've re-architected and rewritten them from the ground up to be iCloud apps. So that is iCloud.
Now, I don't know about you. This is as close to rocket science it can get in business, Anruhal. But if an uncle of mine asks me, beta, ye iCloud kya hai? I think I'll do a damn good job of explaining it. Yes or no? Yeah? And I don't know if any of you had the misfortune of using Mobile Me, because I had. I'm an Apple fanatic. It didn't work. What was it supposed to do? Sync contacts here and there and mail, and you deleted it here, it reappeared there, etc., etc. Now, suppose he didn't talk about this. First coffee break. Yeah, why do they get into this iCloud checker? They should leave this to IBM, no? They are a hardware company, you know, iPhone and Mac. And there starts derailing. And what did it take to stop it? Just one, mea culpa. It wasn't our finest hour. Now you can't. Yeah, you can't start derailing it on that. Yeah? And the other, of course, is language. Did you hear one abstraction? Who was he talking to? Geeks, about the most geeky thing in the world. But he was talking to, as I keep talking in the public speaking program, is that can you talk to the 7-year-old in the audience without talking down? Because then you'll make sense. And so what do you do with that story? You only tell it. Don't put it back on a PowerPoint. Yeah? It's oral. So that's what we talked about today, clarity stories and connection stories. And I can take questions now. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Are we following the same format, writing it down?
I think we may have to catch him up later. We have to
Sure. Yeah, I'm here for both the days, so I'm happy to. There is also 2 articles. It just so happened that it seems to be exactly with what animation they started, which is how do you manage change, and it talks about storytelling and story listening, so it should give you a better idea. But I'm happy to take questions while I'm here. So thanks. Thank you so much.
Great job.
Thank you. We wanted to just give you a gift, Ruchika, if you can do the honors.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Indranil. Our next